Alrighty, well, thanks for joining us today. If this is your first time on this call, it is a purely Q&A session. If we don't have any questions come in, we may go into some additional topics that we have with our support and implementation team. Otherwise, if you guys have questions you would like to review, please post those up in Q&A and we'll just get started there. Looks like first one we have in is on Brokermint API. And so let me just read through this here. Brokermint API is not working properly for us. We created a field map template, but it's not pulling up data correctly. Anyone else having this issue? So great question there. We do get this quite a bit on our integrations here. And so you are on the right track. I'm actually going to start out here going into our apps and APIs. Let me backtrack a quick second there and show you where to go if you have not been in this section before. So under your gear icon, you have apps and APIs, which is where we can connect our integrations. There are times where you may have made a change with an integration. Potentially we need to connect or reconnect that API. If you're experiencing issues like this where the fields aren't mapping properly, oftentimes our support team is going to recommend that you reconnect to that API to give a fresh connection to that outside system. From there, once we have that connection set up, we want to set up what we call an API field map template. This is going to tell the system what fields do we want to push over to that integration, and we can build those under our hammer icon in our template section. Under templates, it should be towards the bottom. I do have some additional tabs here because my demo account that I have open is on our highest scale plan. So for everyone on this call, you may have a slightly different screen, but everyone should see API field map templates in their account. When we're setting this up, we're going to be able to choose the integration that we have connected in our account. I don't have Brokermint per se, but let's say I'm doing .loop here. When we create that template, it's going to allow us to come through and map those fields. So with what you're referencing there, it sounds like we may not be pulling up the same fields where having that refresh with the API can confirm that the data we're pulling back from Brokermint is accurate and up to date. If you're still having issues beyond that, I would recommend continuing to work with our support team. So that way we can dig into that a little bit deeper for your account specifically. But again, if you're running into issues with your API field map, it's not pulling up correctly, we do recommend reconnecting that API connection. And that should allow you to come through and, again, set up how you want to map your fields. So while we're here, I'm just going to do a quick run through on this one. This is the API field map itself. I'm just going to see my property field data in this list here. On the right-hand side should be the data points coming from your integration, and what you see in this drop down should be your open to close fields. So first things first, let's say we made an update to our field in the back end. Sometimes refreshing that connection can really help out with things. So if there's a specific field that you're running into an issue on, what I would do is come to that API field map, deselect that field. So let's say before I had this set up to, let me choose a better one here, MLS number. Let's say it was set up to MLS number, but it's not having a good connection with that. What we would recommend at that point is deselecting the field there. So it should say choose field, and then reset up that connection again. And then I would try applying that field map template for your account and see if it's still running into the same issue for that field. If it's not, we know we just need to give this a refresh with that mapping for that to work. So again, the fix for it is to make sure we deselect to the very top selection of choose field and then reselect the field that we want to map to. Hope that helps. Again, if you're still having issues beyond that, definitely reach out to us in support, let us know, and we'll go from there. Let me, and actually we have some good feedback here from Hannah as well. So it does look like, depending on the Brokermint plan that you're on, you may need to be on the enterprise version to have that integration. So if you're still having, again, issues, I would just take a look at that and see if we need to dig in further. Next question we have here is from Kelsey. I'm working on an intake form. I want to apply a form trigger and add property templates related to certain conditions. it doesn't appear that property templates can be added. So great question on that. Let's dig into it a little bit further. So we actually get this quite a bit when users are first starting out with their setup of how do I create properties in my account? When I click on my new button, I have the option to create new property or select intake form property. When I'm using an intake form option here, I am never going to need that property template majority of the time. There are some, off use cases. I would say there are exceptions to that rule, but majority of the time with intake forms, creating your properties, property templates are no longer needed. And the reason for that is property templates are used when I'm manually creating a property. Let me just show you here. What's going to happen is when I manually create a property, it allows me to select that property template, which is how I can manually add in my task templates, document templates, field templates, etc. Now, with property templates, it's not going to have the same functionality as your intake form where you have those conditions. So I think with what you're trying to do there, Kelsey, I would want to expand on what's included in your property template. When I look at an example, again, I can add in the different templates for my account, but it's not conditional at this point. It's here's everything that I want to apply, and then I can add in more on top of that, or I can remove some if they're not relevant. So I normally don't recommend using property templates unless I'm just getting started with the system. I need to get going now and I'm still building my intake forms, or I'm using outside intake forms in the API to create my properties. Outside of that, if you're using intake forms, what you're going to do instead is use those form triggers to add in the different templates to your account. So I don't have your specific intake form pulled up necessarily, Kelsey, but if you have a use case of what data you're trying to add to your property through the intake form, I can go over that in more detail. But that'll be my first question. What information do I need to add to my property once I submit the intake form? What I'm going to do is, and move really quickly there. Let me backtrack really quick. If this is new for you guys, I am in my hammer icon template editor, and I'm under the intake form template tab. And then from there, I chose my pre-built example here for buyer residential contract. Once I'm in the intake form itself, I just selected this form triggers tab. And this is where I can see all of the existing triggers in this intake form, make edits, changes, and add in new. From there, if you need that bird's eye overview, just view what triggers are already in your account, Kelsey, I would recommend clicking on this sort triggers button to see if you already have a trigger that could be used to pull in these additional details from that property template. If not, again, I would create new. So if I had an example here, let's just say it's inspections. I already have a field section trigger to add in my inspection fields, my inspection task template, document template. So if I need to add more to that, I would recommend expanding this trigger options. I'm on a Mac, so this is going to be Command F. If you're on a PC, it is Control F. That should open a quick search bar in your browser window where you can do a quick keyword search, and it should take you to the area of this page where that word is found. And then I can make changes to these triggers from there. So let's say I need to add in an additional field to this trigger, and this may be a little complex for where you're at. If so, I'll show you here in a second how to manually create these, but I need to add in an additional field or an additional trigger asset, as we call them. I'm going to click into this button here. Anytime I see a trigger and I see this button, when I click on that, it's going to expand my trigger assets. When you hear trigger assets, that is what is applied when this trigger is fired off. So in this case, it's adding in the home inspection due days field and home inspection due date field. If I need to add more, I can choose from this drop down and find the appropriate detail I'm adding in. If I need to remove something, I can hit that trash can icon. So again, for your use case, I would take a look at what's being applied in that property template and then take those templates and build form triggers around them. So instead of using the property template, you're just using the intake form and the form triggers to apply your information to your record. If you have follow-ups on that one, definitely let me know. And let me actually scroll down here in our QA. There isn't a field template option for that in intake forms. Great addition to that. So let's talk through field templates a little bit. I'm going to move a little quickly here just because we do have some additional questions we need to get to as well. But When I'm working with intake forms, the first tab that everyone starts out with is your Fields tab. I don't need to use a field template with my intake forms because field templates, again, those kind of coincide with property templates. When I manually create a property or I'm creating properties again through the API. Instead, with the intake form, on the Fields tab, I can select the fields that I need to add to my property every single time, no matter what is relevant to that property. So standard fields, for example, contract acceptance date, earnest money due date, contract status, client type, title, etc. When I look at this list and I scroll down to my inspection fields, my septic fields, I am not pulling those in on this tab because that's conditional. I only need to pull in my inspection fields if I say, yes, there's going to be an inspection. So that is why we don't use field templates in intake forms, is we're giving more control to use conditions to pull in the specific fields that you need versus the same fields every single time. If you are using field templates in your account, it is important to know I can only apply one field template to a property at a time. If I apply a different field template, it is going to remove the fields that are there and only put the fields that are on that one template for that property. So it really doesn't give you the type of control that you'd be looking for based on this example. So let me read this secondary follow-up. I want to add essentially everything that's within my property template to the intake trigger related to certain conditionals, which MLS, buyer, seller, dual. My property template includes all templates except for trigger templates. I have those buried under some desk. Okay, so let's talk through conditional fields before we move on to that one fully. So what do I do if I need to pull in additional fields while I'm filling out that intake form? Oftentimes, every account is going to have additional field groups here with a field group called intake questions or something similar. And what we do is use these questions to pull in those additional fields with what we call form conditions. So if I say, yes, there's an HOA, we've built it out in this demo account with a form condition. Let me find it here. Is there an HOA? I say yes. My action is going to include my additional field for that HOA days field. I also have that required, so I have to input a date there if I say there's an HOA for this property. So that's going to be how I get additional fields on my intake form as I'm filling it out. For your case, you're looking to add in fields after the fact once the form is submitted, which is going to be under this form triggers tab. So again, just taking a quick peek at these, moved a little quickly here, but all of our field triggers are up top. And as we can see, we're using those intake questions to say, if there is a well, then add in my well fields. If I scroll down, I'm also going to see a very similar one for my well field section. So I would take a look at your field organization, start creating out some base field triggers for this. To do one together really quickly, I am normally adding my fields to the property when my form is submitted. I typically don't add all my fields on the approval side because I want to be able to see them and use them in some condition logic as I'm going through that approval process. From there, trigger function, if this is a template you're adding in or removing, then we would need to select that option. If it is a field section, then we would select that. And once we say create, it's going to open up this right-hand panel where, again, I can choose the trigger assets. What field section do I need to add into my property when this trigger is fired off? So let me do, I don't think I have any new ones here. I have to remember to delete this. Let me do cleaning detail. I actually have no questions on that, but we'll come back to it. From there, I'm going to come to that trigger, hit my options to expand or my trigger options to expand, either or, but best practice, I have a detail section. I always start out with telling myself, what is this trigger going to do? In this case, add cleaning details field section. It is a purple text box, so to hit save, I need to hit enter. The last piece of this is adding in my condition. Personally, I do not turn on my form trigger until it's fully set up, but it's kind of hard to see right now for an example. So I'm going to toggle this on so it's active. So that way it's a little bit easier to show this conditional build. So in this case, I would have a field being used for that question, and I don't think, oh, we do have it. I would choose a intake question like this and say, if it's equal to yes, cleaning is required, then I want to pull in this field section for cleaning details. Once I hit add, I should see that condition logic here. Now, in your other example, you also mentioned, what do I do if I want to say only add in this field section or this template if it's a buyer type of buyer or dual? I can add a secondary and condition to this statement if I would need to have that that logic. So if I need an and statement, I'm going to click add condition. If I need an or statement to this condition here, I would just click field. If I need an or statement, it's actually called a child condition. Otherwise, if I just add, it should show me the same exact screen I saw before. So in this case, let's do client type is equal to buyer. And then I maybe want to have that secondary or function for dual. I can go through and build that up. So this would be similar to the example that you gave there, Kelsey. If you're still running into questions beyond that, I would definitely reach out, let us know what's your exact use case you're running into. But I think biggest thing to note is that property template. Really what you want to do is build form triggers around each of those templates added there, because it's not going to be needed for the intake form itself. Hope that helps. I do want to point out we are looking at setting up some group setup sessions for deeper strategies like this, because we know there's a lot that can go into some of these best practices. And so we're shooting for hopefully in March that we can go live with those. We will keep you guys updated, but keep an eye out for that as we're moving forward as well. Let me make sure I'm not missing any follow-ups on that. Any additional points there, Hannah, too, on your end, just what you're seeing with implementation?
No, I think you covered it thoroughly.
Perfect. Awesome. Next one we have here. Hey, Tammy, can a one sheet be added based on what team is selected on the intake form? Can't figure if that's a form trigger. So one sheets are a little bit different in open to close. I don't actually apply those to my property through any type of trigger function. What I can do is build out what we call one sheet templates. So that way, maybe it's an internal instruction as you're approving the intake form. Maybe it's a task reminder to apply your one sheet. But what you would likely want to do based on your question there is build out different one sheets potentially for the different teams you're working with. And then once you have those templates in your account, when you're on your property, you can come to your one sheets tab, create that one sheet there, and then apply that template. And so this would be a manual task at this point, just because we do want to make sure you guys are going through and updating some of those settings for one sheets, because it does have a slightly different functionality than a email trigger in open to close. So let me just do this sample here. And Hannah, definitely feel free to chime in on this one as well. I know you see a lot of questions on this, but the biggest thing to point out with one sheets, and I think there's actually some good strategies that we see in implementation where we may not schedule the one sheet in the template itself. We may give you guys the ability to schedule that when you apply the template, because you may want to have a different schedule based on this particular transaction or this client that you're working with. But with one sheets, they are auto sends. So when we go to schedule, so let me backtrack here under options, we should see schedule and send. You can select the contacts that they're sent to, and the day of the week that they're sent on, and the time of day. It is going to be sent out in batches in our backend system. So it says it's in an approximation of 15 minutes. So kind of keep that in mind for the schedule that we hit send here for, but it is an email with a PDF attachment with that one sheet. And again, it is an auto send based on this time of day here. So to summarize your question again, Tammy, no, we cannot automate those being applied through the intake form or form triggers. They are more of a manual task to apply the template and then make sure we set up that schedule. Any additional points though, Hannah? Because I feel like
yeah,
some extra nuggies there.
Only one. The main reason it's never going to be added as a trigger on an intake form is because of that schedule time and date. We want to make sure that when you're applying this one sheet, that it has all the appropriate contacts that it needs to send to, it has all the information that it needs to pull in, the documents that it needs to pull in. If we built it off of a form trigger, we would have, one sheet's being applied and then possibly sending out to who knows, right? It could send out automatically to no one because you might not have enough contacts on there. You might not have it set up correctly. That's the main reason why we don't have it that way.
Yeah. Let us know if there's any follow-up questions on that one. Let me do a quick scan there. Okay, so it looks like it's just for your guys' internal use. So at that point, you can always set up a schedule to send to yourselves on that. Otherwise, you should be able to come through. Just make sure that in your templates, you don't have a schedule set there. And then once you apply that to your property, you should be able to come down, hit preview or download for your own internal use. Okay, perfect. Next question we have here is, my team is looking to switch CRMs. Can you show me how most use Follow Up Boss with open to close? Great question there. So first things first, if you have not gone through already, I would recommend going through and setting up that apps and APIs connection. From there, I would also recommend that if you're on a team, your agents are using Follow Up Boss, we do want to make sure that they're added as agent portal users under organization and users, so we can see them in list. And they can then add their Follow Up Boss account connection in their agent portal profile. Otherwise, once that connection has been made through the API, the best practice and daily usage that we see here is when I get a new file, I want to make sure I have that connection to my Follow Up Boss records. So I can come under this More tab. I should see Follow Up Boss here. And then I'm going to have 3 different options or details that I can sync to. Now, I don't have Follow Up Boss open myself on this call, but we may be able to on our next webinar actually pull up our FUB demo account. But with the contact sync, I should have the option to connect the profile that I'm syncing to. So in this case, this would be my implementation demo FUB account. From there, I can search contacts in this account. So let's pretend implementation demo is my agent. I can find this contact in my agent's profile, which again, I don't have a great example there for you, but there'd be 4 tabs that I can toggle on to sync data to this contact. I can sync my email history, text history, notes history, and then from there, I can also sync my field history to that contact record in FUB. Now, with this, I have seen quite a few different best practices there. Because I may be working with this contact, maybe it's a buyer and a seller, they're selling their house and buying at the same time. With my field sync, I only have 1 set of fields to sync to in FUB. So oftentimes we're seeing this contact sync being used to sync that email, text, and notes history. So that way, as a transaction manager, I can have my details show up in my agent's FUB account. So that way they're in a loop on some of those conversations that we're having as we process the file. And my agent can see it when they're pulling up that contact in their FUB account. So that should show up as a note under your middle tab in FUB on your contact. So it doesn't affect any of your smart list analytics over there either. With that, I'm actually going to bounce down to this widget sync. The difference with the widget in FUB is I actually can have a little window on the right-hand panel in my FUB screen on a contact. Again, kind of hard to show without my example here, so apologies on that, but it's a widget. And if I turn on that sync, I can actually see different details for this property on that contact. It really is actually dependent on the roles that we set up for the sync. So this may be actually a great one to bring up in our next webinar. I'll make sure that we have access to that FUB account, Jeffrey, just so we can show you the widget. But that would give me the ability to toggle between different properties that I may have for this contact, be able to view tasks, fields, documents, contacts, whatever I've allowed permission-wise to be shared with that FUB role. So if you're using this widget sync, one thing I do want to highlight that I can't necessarily show you right now, but it would be here is setting up FUB roles. If you are not seeing any widget details push over to that contact in FUB, it's oftentimes due to a permission thing with the role that we have assigned. So Hannah, can you actually make a note that we'll circle back to this on our next webinar for you, Jeffrey? And then we'll get that posted up to our knowledge base if you want to watch it back too.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have a couple webinars that we've covered in the past that might be a good solution as well, just in case, if we want to get it sooner than later.
That would be awesome, actually. Yeah, if you actually want to post that up in the Q&A thread, that would be awesome.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
definitely.
the last sync here is the deal sync. So very similar, I can connect to the agent's account that I want to sync a deal to. From there, I can go through and select the stage in FUB. So is this a buyer deal, seller deal type of thing? And then what stage am I at? Can enter in some of my base details. And then once I set up my initial connection, I can actually apply a field map for my deal field sync. And so I believe this is a newer feature over in FUB where you can create custom deal fields now, which is really awesome. We actually opened up our capabilities with this integration to be able to sync fields over to those new deal fields. So that would be a beneficial part of this setup once that, again, initial connection is made. And then the last thing with deal sync is I can assign contacts and users to that deal in FUB. So that way you're able to keep your agents up to date, do that initial push over to that system. Otherwise, one other thing that I like to try and point out here with our FUB integration is I do have the option to push over and assign a task to a FUB profile or agent in FUB. With the tasks that I push over, it can be handy so that way it shows up in their task list. I do want to point out it does not necessarily backfill when that task is completed. The agent would want to give you a heads up on that, but we would be able to get that over into their task queue for some of your collaboration efforts. So otherwise, there are some details with the contact sync we can actually do for FUB. So when we go over to this contact sync and widget sync, if I don't want to do that for every contact every time, I can set up some defaults in our contacts now. So that way, if I add Pam to a deal, if I want to always set up a FUB connection, I would be able to do so. I don't have it for this profile per se, but it would show up next to client portal here. So we'll get that webinar over to Jeffrey. And if you have any follow-up questions beyond that, feel free to reach out to us in support and we'll try and circle back in our next webinar. Let me see. Next one here, we have from Patty. It appears that there are some amazing ideas in the Idea Lab. What is the criteria for OTC to even considering looking at them? I added point of ideas, Justin, note the items that have been incorporated in a section that shows those accepted ideas. This is a really good point. I'm glad you brought this up, actually. So Patty, Tammy, I would say with this, it's actually one of our goals here to go through and do a little bit of cleanup with our Ideas Lab. We had a pretty big push this last 2 quarters with the new pricing plan change where we added in a lot of great features based on the feedback that was posted up through our Ideas Lab. And so what we try and do is as we're defining the roadmap and some of the updates we're going to be making with the product, we do reference that Idea Lab quite heavily and just seeing what feedback you guys have. There's some really, really great suggestions in there. And it's just a matter of seeing what's going to fill the biggest need and what's going to make the most sense with the product and what can actually be done with it. And so as we go through and do some cleanup, we'll actually have some new product release posting schedules for new feature updates, that type of thing. So it is top of mind for us. We are going to see some changes here with that. But in the meantime, if you guys have additional suggestions on the system or ideas of, hey, I would love to see a feature like this in open to close, definitely continue to keep posting in the Idea Lab. I know we recommend that when you guys reach out to us in support. And the reason for that is, again, it gives us a central place to be able to see everything that you guys have suggestion-wise. So keep on posting. Again, we'll be doing some cleanup here. But if you have additional suggestions beyond that, definitely reach out and let us know. Next question we have is from Amber here. Can you please show us the best way to use the default settings under the date calculations? What each 4 of those ones mean for the dates and tasks? Yes, let's take a peek here. Let me pick a better example. So if you guys haven't been over here already, when you create a new property and when you're approving an intake form, the system is going to prompt you to come, sorry, hiccups, to your defaults and settings to make sure that we have those set up before we start processing our file. And so if you have not been here already, it is going to be under a property. In this green arrow drop down, we should see defaults and settings, third from the top. That should open a left-hand window where we can come through and see, again, the defaults for this record. So there are quite a few different settings that we can set up on this. I'm just going to focus on the date calculation options for the question that came through. And how do we use these? Hannah, definitely feel free to chime in on this as well with what you're seeing in implementation. But with count days using, I know what with Colorado's contract, the area I used to service as a TC, my contract was very clear in how I needed to count my days for the contract. If I needed to observe calendar days and not skip weekends, then I selected calendar days. If I use business days in that contract, I'm going to select business days. What this is going to do is any date that has NA for count days using, it is going to use this as default. So if I have not preset my date calculations to something else, the system is going to use what I say here to count any date calculations for your profile or property. So I think majority of the time I'm seeing calendar days being selected. Again, Hannah, if you're seeing some additional strategies there, let me know. And then skip federal holidays. This one, it's fairly straightforward. Do we observe those federal holidays when it comes to your dates, tasks, deadlines, etc.? If we count them, we're going to make sure we say count federal holidays, and it's not going to skip over those. If we say skip, it's going to skip. I do want to point out we have had some feedback on this particular setting that not all federal holidays are showing up in the system. With that, we are taking a deeper look at this. It is a little bit more challenging because federal holidays may change depending on your service area. We do have some users that may not be in the same place or observe the same federal holidays. And so this is a bigger roadmap discussion that we're having, but for the time being, I would select the option that makes the most sense for you and your team, and then how you should be able to see some of those holidays on your calendar on the front end. Weekend role, federal holiday role. So if I say count federal holidays, what happens if a date, a task, a trigger prompts up as due when it falls on a weekend? Do you want it to stay due on the weekend, or do you want it to roll back to the Friday before? Do you want it to roll forward to the next business day? That's going to be this option here. Again, this would only apply to any dates that have not been preset with a different weekend roll option. So if I didn't select NA when I'm building my task template, I told my task specifically to roll over, it would not observe what I set here. Otherwise, federal holiday roll, very similar. If it falls on a federal holiday, do you want it to land on that holiday? Do you want it to roll back to the following business day or the business day ahead? Outside of that, I do want to just point out where are the other dates that I'm talking about, because it can be a little bit confusing. What I'm referencing is, when I'm creating my tasks and I select this calendar date options, I have the ability to set my weekend roll, federal holiday roll, skip federal holidays, and my time frame in the task itself. So if I selected NA here, the system is going to use whatever I have in my defaults and settings for that calculation. If I want it to be something different for this one task, I'm going to say for this one task, I want it to roll forward specifically or roll backward specifically. Again, we have gotten a lot of questions on this, so if there's any follow-ups, please post those in. But Hannah, any additional points on that?
Nothing on my end.
Okay, perfect. Next question we have here, can I clone a task from a template to add it to a different template, i.e. move from seller contract to closing tasks to seller main UC tasks? So we don't necessarily have the ability to clone tasks from one template to the other. You do have the ability to clone your templates though. So one thing that you could do is clone the seller contract to close task template and rename it to your seller main UC tasks, and then remove any of the tasks that are no longer relevant and then keep the ones that are. And that's a common thing that we see users doing as they're recreating other templates in their account. Otherwise, if you are on our Pro or Scale plan, you can also come down to trigger templates. If you haven't built out all of your tasks triggers already, and you can actually build what we call a task trigger template. And this can then be used to apply this one or multiple triggers in multiple different task templates in your account. So that way you don't have to recreate that over and over again. Oftentimes creating a task trigger template is used for accounts where maybe I'm servicing multiple different states. Maybe I have 5 different types of contracts that I need to handle. And maybe this is my opening email. And I want to have this applied in 5 different templates. If I build it here, I can then come over to a task template that I need to add it to. Let's just use my UC one. Find the task that I would want to add it to. So let's just use this one as an example. And then from there, I can apply that template. So this would allow me to not have to recreate that trigger again over and over and over again. I could just find the appropriate task I need to add it to and then make my changes from there. So again, this particular piece is available on our Pro and Scale plan. The main use case, again, is if maybe I'm working multiple different states, have multiple different templates, I need to add that into. Otherwise, for your particular use case, it may be best just to clone your task template as a whole and then continue to edit from there. Hope that helps. Let us know if you have any follow-ups on that question. Next one we have here, when you update an email or wording on a template, does it autocorrect that on all active templates? Really, really great question there, Amber. So looking at email templates in your backend of the system, if I make a change to this intro email to buyers here, if this template is being used in my task templates and those task templates are applied to a property, as long as my email has not been rendered, those changes should be reflected on any properties that have this template being used on. What do I mean by that email has not been rendered, you say? That is actually going to be when I'm inspecting my emails and editing. If I go and hit inspect, this email has not been fully rendered. It is showing me a preview of what this email would pull in. But if I go in and make a change to this template in the back end and come back and inspect it, it should show that change for me because I have not rendered or applied that template fully to this edit window send. If I hit edit and I start making changes to it, so I hit this edit email, it's going to give me this prompt. This will fully render this email and convert all merge fields into content and remove any empty merge fields. This is the point. As soon as I hit yes, render the email, any changes I make to the main email template will not be applied. So as long as you haven't rendered and you make a change in the back end, it should show that change on the front end. If I've hit rendered here, I would actually need to go through and reapply that template after the fact for it to show those changes. So any points I'm missing on that one, Hannah, that you know of?
No, I think that was great.
Okay, thank you. Next one we have here is
Sorry, I think I might have cleared a question on accident. Is it the it's from Amber, right?
That one we
just did.
We are new. What integrations are there for Skyslope 2-way or 1-way? Can OTC upload docs? and property info to Skyslope, and then can you enter a new transaction? So great question there, James. Let's take a deeper look at that one. Like all integrations, we need to start out by adding that connection to our Skyslope account under apps and APIs. So if you have not done that already, we would need to make sure that we go through and connect to our Skyslope profile. From there, it should show us the profiles that we have connected for your specific account. Now, that is for your profile, James. If you have additional admins, TCs in the system, they would need to go through and make sure they connect to Skyslope as well. Once that initial connection is made, very similar, I'm going to want to create a API field map template if I'm going to be syncing any fields to that Skyslope account. I don't believe I have a Skyslope account connected, so I can't create a test, but it should be very similar to what we see here. I think there's a slight difference than what we showed earlier with .loop, because Skyslope is going to actually allow you to choose, is this a sale? Is this a listing? Your fields may be slightly different depending on the record type you're working with. Once we set up that API field map template, though, for your different Skyslope record types, again, this should be roughly what we're doing, is just saying this field goes to this field in Skyslope. On the front end of our property, we can come to our More tab. Under More tab, all of your apps and APIs are going to be found under this list, and you should be able to see Skyslope in the middle. Now, it's actually a good example. If I'm using both .loop and Skyslope, I can only have one connected to a property at a time. And so I already have .loop connected to this current profile, so the message is showing me that I cannot connect to Skyslope until I disconnect that .loop. So if you use .loop for your initial contract creation, you can go through, set up that connection, pull in and sync your data, and then you use Skyslope for compliance for the rest of the file. I would use both integrations. Start with .loop, do everything that you need to, and then come in, you can disconnect your loop. Once it's disconnected, you should be able to set up Skyslope. I'm just going to find a new record for training though. It's not going to really show me, but in this case, it would allow me to connect to the Skyslope profile. Either I can connect to an existing Skyslope record, or I can create a new Skyslope record with this connection. So to your question, yes, I can start a new transaction in Skyslope from open to close. It's actually going to give me some fields that I can fill out to sync that data over. Once the initial connection has been made, then it's going to look a little bit more like this, where I can import details from Skyslope, I can import contacts, import documents, and then open in Skyslope. There are some limitations to Skyslope's API and things that we cannot pull back from the system. But rule of thumb, what we recommend is have your data come into open to close and then push over to Skyslope. Again, due to those limitations, we can't pull information from Skyslope as much as we can send information to it. So I would start there, see how the fields push over to your Skyslope record. For anyone on this call, I do want to highlight, I know there's been some questions with syncing the lender contact to Skyslope. Our team has been looking into that, and I do think we have an update there. So we'll be getting that posted to our change log. So that shouldn't be an issue as we move forward fully. But if you guys run into questions beyond that, definitely reach out and let us know. Let me make sure I'm not missing a piece of your question here. Two-way, one-way. So yep, again, one way, sync open to close to Skyslope for the most part. You can, again, import from there, but document push is going to be from OTC to Skyslope. Any pieces I'm missing on that one though, Hannah?
There was just one part that I think is kind of cool, and it's something to keep in mind, and it's something that I literally have saved in my notes. So if you have it marked as a sale, because there's two versions of a transaction for Skyslope, right? We've got the sale and we've got the listing. If it's a sale, you'll be able to push and pull the documents back and forth. If it is a listing, you are not able to push those documents over. So that would be the only thing I would say is if we needed to push documents from open to close into Skyslope, make sure you have that property marked as a sale. And if it's a listing, just keep in mind that we can't upload documents from open to close to Skyslope if it's marked as a listing. That's really the only thing. It's something that I've run into a lot in implementation.
No, that's really good. I knew it was one of those ways, like it wouldn't push. I just couldn't remember which
Yeah.
one. So
And that's
thank
why I
you.
have it saved. Exactly. Yeah.
So next question we have there from James is they're in integration with kvCORE. So at this time, we do not have a native integration with kvCORE. When you come to apps and APIs, these are the integrations that we can connect to. DocuSign is an integration that's only available on our version 2 pricing on our Pro and Scale plans. Outside of that, you should be able to connect to these profiles on any of our pricing plans. Now, with kvCORE, I can't quite speak to what kvCORE has available on their end for outside integrations, but I do know we have a webhooks tool, and this can be used to send data outside of open to close to another system using a tool like Zapier. And so with our webhook tool, this is also on our version 2 pricing, our Pro and Scale plan up. And I have the option to send out data when a property is created or when a property field is updated. I also have some capabilities here with my contact details being also sent out through those webhooks. So you may be able to look into a webhook to Zapier to kvCORE type setup, depending on, again, what kvCORE has available. Otherwise, we do have an open API. And so if there's some advanced integrations that your team is looking for, you can always come to our developer documentation, which can be found at opentoclose.com. We have API at the bottom of the page, and this is going to show you all of our connections in the backend that you could use for, again, advanced integrations, depending on what your setup looks like. So I would start there. Again, see if kvCORE has those connections. Last I checked in Zapier, I think their app was in beta. I just don't recall what types of triggers or actions they had available for that.
Awesome. And I'll add the API link to the chat. That way you can grab that, James. So Amber has a follow-up question to a question that I had answered in chat. I just kind of typed out an answer. So I'm going to read that for you first. So her initial question was, if you select skip federal holiday, does that change the date or just the tasks? And I let Amber know that it's a trickle down. So if you're using an intake form, it'll go off of whatever you've set on the intake form. It'll apply that to the property. If those tasks are set as NA, it's going to follow what's on the property. Now her follow-up question is, so if I have my date template set up regarding the federal holiday and then update the default and settings tab, it won't overwrite the date template, correct? I believe it won't override the date template. Jana, have you seen anything different? I believe as long as it's contingent when we're looking at that property and we're looking at that date, it will stick with whatever is the rule is on the date template as opposed to going with whatever's on the property. But I'm not sure if anyone's seen something different.
As long as it's not set to NA. That is the only caveat with it. If your date template is set up to NA and you put roll federal holidays back, then it would observe that and roll federal holidays back. And so if you need a different setup for things, what we have been running into is you can keep your date templates to not weekend roll. We would just want to make sure when you're setting up your defaults and settings to keep those selected as NA here as well. So if there's any tasks or any triggers or dates that you do need to roll over, instead of having your defaults and settings do that for as a whole, we would select NA here and then find the specific task or the specific date in your example there with a date template and have that rollover period built out here instead. So kind of flip flop, instead of defaults and settings controlling that weekend roll, federal holiday roll, have defaults and settings set up to NA and control that in the individual dates, tasks, triggers for your account.
Perfect.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was a much more thorough explanation from what I wrote.
My brain always gets stuck on that. I'll be totally honest with you guys. Like there's one thing in the system that my brain gets a little bit caught up on, and it is the rollover period. But that's been the best way that I've seen so far to set this up to give you guys the best control for those individual touch points.
It's also my understanding that on the intake form, the only thing you need to set is whether it's skipping or counting federal holidays. I believe you're still okay to push forward, fill out the intake form, have it go through. It won't tell you to set your default and settings as long as the skip federal holidays or count federal holidays, as long as that skip federal holidays rule has been set and the date calculation timeframe has been set, you shouldn't have to worry about the rolling. That's from my understanding. So yeah, so how Jana has it set up, you shouldn't have an issue with, it shouldn't prompt you to open up your default and settings as long as you have these two set up, the date calculation and the skip federal holidays.
Awesome. No, and that's, again, there's certain things like this where if you guys have follow-ups, like we all have them, definitely keep posting them in for your particular use cases as well. But we can always circle back to this one down the line too if needed. Looks like Nick, and any final thoughts on that actually, Hannah, before we move on?
No, I think that's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Next one we have here is from James on Skyslope. Is this something that will change with Skyslope listing? So with that, we can't speak to third-party systems and how they set up their platform, their API connections. And a lot of this is due to Skyslope's API. So it's not something that we can, again, speak to per se, but we are doing what we can to give the best connection to that Skyslope record. So if you guys have any specific questions on how it currently connects, definitely let us know. But as far as changing that portion of Skyslope's API, that would be completely dependent on Skyslope and them opening up that access on their end. I'm hoping for it, crossing all my fingers. So we'll let you guys know if anything ever does change with our integrations on that side of things, because it is something that we would love as well. At this time, last I heard, we are limited there though. And it looks like that was our last question. So we have about 9 minutes left on this call. If you guys have any additional questions, please post those up in Q&A. Otherwise, Hannah, if there's any specific questions you're seeing coming up with implementation or support, we can go into those a little bit too.
Yeah, I think the only thing is someone had asked a question and I sent you guys the link, that particular person, the direct link to the Wednesday workshop. Think of it as like the bundle of articles in our support center. If you wanted to share that with the chat or show them how to navigate to it, I think that would be good. Once this recording is done, so once we've completed this meeting, we usually go through and we figure out, where are all the questions at? So we like to create that timeline for you guys in that particular video. And then you can always go to our support system. You can type in webinars. You can click on webinars. This will show the different webinars that we have. So the onboarding. And now if you scroll down, Wednesday workshops. So we like to keep them in order of the weeks, descending or ascending. So this was last week's, or actually it might have been
before. We're still
previous
working on
weeks, right? We're still working on last week's. That's right. But yeah, so this is where you'd be able to see the past Wednesday workshops.
Yeah, we again, like Hannah mentioned, we are adding the chapters to those. That way, if you guys want to skip to a specific question, you can find that without having to watch through the whole thing per se. Mm-hmm. But if there are times where you guys have questions that you would love to be able to see live, but can't necessarily attend to the webinar, feel free to send those into support. Say, hey, I would love if we could go over this in our upcoming workshop. Can you add this to the list? And then you can always watch that recording back. We actually have an internal list of things that we'll add into the call to make sure that we're covering all of those questions. So when kind of highlighting this too, we are making some updates with our support center and just how we're doing some of our collections here. And so keep in mind, we will be having some updates just as a whole with our content onboarding details in the upcoming months. And so if you guys have feedback on that, definitely let us know. We are really trying to build out an experience that works for each stage of your build out. We know the first 30 days is a bit different than the next 3 months versus your next year with open to close as you continue to refine your account. So keep coming to these workshops, posting up great questions. It doesn't look like we have any left in queue. So if you guys are good to go, we can wrap up a bit early today. Kind of leave it open for a couple more minutes if anyone has anything else. Also, I'm just going to throw this out there. If there's particular features that you guys would like to just hear additional strategies on, you don't necessarily have specific questions, feel free to post those up as well. I know with the version 2 pricing, there's been a lot of great tools that have been released that you may not have been able to play around with just yet, but we can always go through those on this call, actually show you what to look for with some of those updates, and even do a little bit of build out down the line. So I think when we get a lot on, if you guys, I'm just going to go into it. We get this question quite a bit. If you are on our version 2 pricing and you're wondering what an introspector tool is, that is the ability to see where a field is being used in your account. And so again, introspector, a fancy word for kind of a lookup tool. So if you come to your field editor and you're on version 2 pricing, it should be on Grow Pro or Scale. You're going to see this little eye icon. It should hover over and say inspect. When you click on that, it's going to open up this right-hand panel where you can see the different templates that this field is being used in. This has been a hugely helpful tool as we're building out an implementation, because if a field is being used in a ton of different templates and I move it, delete it, any of those things, like it could have an impact to me and my team. So using this introspector tool, that is a great way to see where that field is being used if you need to go make changes to it, and also tell you, like, I don't want to delete this field. Rule of thumb, we actually just create an archive field section in our account, so we don't have to delete fields. We can just move them and they're out of sight, out of mind at that point. But introspector, again, just this eye icon, the ability to see where my fields are being used so I can quickly, again, make changes as needed. So things like that, let us know what features you guys are interested in. Otherwise, we will wrap up a bit early today. Thank you guys for coming and hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.